day, and God bless your service. And, here you go.
So if any of you know me, you know I really don't like microphones, but I've been told I must use one. They scare me, so I'm going to use it anyway because I've been forced to. I suppose it would be ideal in a talk to servants to do as somebody told you to do in service, so I will use it. I'm a really big fan of block quotes. Anybody who knows me knows that. Basically, the talk is a series of quotes that we can think and talk about together, so you will not be able to read it past your row. I'm just saying it's up to you. I would prefer if you were close to me so we could be together. I could see your faces. If anybody falls asleep, I can know it's time to end the talk, you know, that kind of thing. Because those things are helpful. So, but it's up to you guys. You only moved up 5 rows, even though we stared at each other. But anyway. So we'll start in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. I was asked to do this talk, which fortunately and unfortunately maybe, I have become like the Acedia talk guy because I'm obsessed, apparently. So is Freddie, by the way. Ask him too if you want. But I became obsessed when I read about this years ago and was like, wait, I see that in me. Oh, I see that in other people. Wait, I see that in the whole like culture itself. I think like this is something that is very much a problem with our age, not just we often think of things like envy or judgment or anger, and you know, you can think, okay, that's an angry person, oh, that person's prone to gluttony, whatever. I think this is something that the whole age is kind of prone to. In the West, for a long time, it was called sloth, which is why you see the subtitle Sloth and More, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I think, or I hope, the relevance in talking about it with you guys is that Acedia, this thing I'm going to describe to you, has a lot of bearing not just on how I live my everyday life and go about my business and treat my children and so forth, but very much with how we coexist with one another in church, and very much can be a part of our service. Problems that we see in service with lack of dedication or overzealousness or that sort of like, probably the curse in service is the inconsistency, the like came for 6 weeks, stopped coming for 3, came back for a season and decided you were too tired, you know, that kind of stuff. I hope you'll be convinced that's the case, but I won't worry. But anyway, you guys will tell me if you thought it was relevant or not. Like no judgment at all. So we're going to talk to each other freely. Who's ever heard of the word Acedia? No, you didn't have to identify yourself like that. Okay, who's heard of the term the passions? Who's heard of this concept? Okay, good. So about the same people. So I really like starting with definitions because I think if I say something and we're on different pages, like we don't know what the common source of what we're talking about is, maybe there'll be some misunderstanding. So if it's boring for the start, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that we're together. So to start, when it comes to talking about the passions, we're talking about those things or attachments that we call sin or addiction or passion that seem to have a hold of us, that seem to control the way we act, or that seem to have undue influence over us. Thinking to St. Paul, who talks about that which he wills to do and does not, and that which he wills not to do and which he practices, right? And we all know this feeling, and the church has words for this. Do you want to join me? Do you want to do the talk with me? Can I have him? No, just join me. Look, my son normally does this with me, so do you want to talk for a minute? Wait, you're going to steal it? I don't want it anyway. Okay. He really likes microphones. He knew I didn't want it. This is the work of the Spirit. My son would do the same thing, except for he'd start hitting me in the head with it. So that's the difference. I'm so sorry. If it were my choice, I'd give it to you. So Just to start with the definition, when we talk about sin. From St. Gregory of Nyssa, he tells us that sin is nothing else than alienation from God, who is the true and only life. St. Cyril, in his commentary on John, says that sin takes its rise from turning aside from that which is better to that which is not, and it is produced in those whose nature it is to turn and who are recipients of change unto what they ought not. That's fancy sounding, it's not that fancy. But what these two church fathers are telling us is that sin is a sort of negation. We have a design as human beings. God made us for himself, for particular purposes, and sin is the undoing of that, the undermining of those things. And in Greek, it comes from the word hamartia, which means to miss the mark. Now, in Greek, it really actually implies, like if you imagine if you're shooting a bow and arrow against a target, and you have a bullseye, if you miss the bullseye, you could call that a hamartia. And that's what sin in biblical text, in Greek anyway, implies, in the sense that God has made us for himself. And he's shown us, both in an educative way in the law, and then our Lord Jesus Christ directly reveals to us what the authentic life looks like. This is what you were meant to be like. This is how you were meant to live for the purpose of coming to him. And so we could say that when we talk about sin, we're talking about a destructive mode of being, which is why sin takes its turn from the changing from what is better to that which is not, right? It's why sin often, when you think about it, has its root in the defection of something good. So that, like, as Orthodox Christians, we fast 200 plus days a year, right? But we wouldn't want to be the ones to say, no, food is evil, that's why we don't eat, right? We believe, as St. Paul says, that the marital bed is holy, right? But we wouldn't want to say that, well, the body is kind of evil, and that's why celibacy and monasticism and all this stuff. And we don't say those things. But we have a rule for understanding how it is these are meant to be gifted to us by God and used by human beings, or taken up, or whatever the case may be. You know, so when we talk about the passions, we're not so much, say, gluttony, for example. Everybody can think of gluttony and imagine something, especially when Rafah is nearby. We're not there yet, but when I do this talk prior to Lent, everybody's like, I know what gluttony looks like. I'm going to experience it in a week. But when we think of that, right, we have to remember our definition is that which takes me away from God, right? And often when it comes, like when I'm with my high school youth, the immediate question for them is like, oh, what, so God's angry if I'm fat? You know, which is my youth giving me a hard time, as you can imagine. But it's like, no, you missed the purpose, right? In calling gluttony a passion or a sin, what the church identifies is that I've taken the gift given to me by God, the food which nurtures my flesh, and I've suggested that instead of a gift, it's now mine. I'm going to use it to satisfy myself, to become a god to my own belly, you know, and to satisfy whatever desire I have right now to consume. And the church fathers tell us that gluttony, which is not the topic for discussion today, is really a problem of wanting to become a lord over things. And that's why the passions start with gluttony, where you suddenly now think you have the lordship or the control over everything around you, and you want it to be subject to you. And that starts from the food and drink that you interact with every day. And so if we see this context, then we begin to get greater context as to why something like acedia, which we're going to talk about, or gluttony, or any of these things are called sin by the church. Again, to indicate to us the path, and say, well, this is where the path has fallen off. This is where you've used these things made by God, meant for good, right? And we've fallen away. I'll give you one other image to make this clear, hopefully. St. Gregory of Nyssa talks about high-mindedness, what is often talked about as vainglory today. And he says, like, high-mindedness is instilled in you to know that you weren't made for the things of the earth. That to drown in the pig's feed, as the prodigal son does, you know, playing in the mud, if you will, or becoming a slave of sin, as the Israelites do. You were made for higher things. One way to respond to that is to repent, like the prodigal son does. Another way is to say, I'm better than everybody else, right? And to let vainglory become its own problem. And so the notion that St. Gregory tries to get to us in that context is to say, sin really does take its rise from the turning aside things which are better to things which are not. That which God gave me, or put in me, or presented before me, or whatever, and I abuse it. I wrong it, rather than it being wrong, per se. So then you get the list of the passions. And in English, this word is like totally lost on us now. English is a funny language, right? Because it's linguistic inheritance. Some of the words don't make any sense anymore. And so the word passion, as used even into the 1960s, has no resemblance to how it's used now. And it has nothing to do with how it was used in what the church fathers were writing. Opinion poll. I always use this picture, and I'm always interested. What is that guy experiencing? You tell me. Yeah, okay, so some people say a headache. What would you call this? Okay, thank you. Because I put this picture up, and somebody said, I think he's sad. And I was like, I've never seen somebody look like that and be sad. So, and another person said maybe he's really excited about something, and I just like, I lost it there. So this to me is a picture of anger. And I use anger to illustrate the passions because I think it's one that we can put our finger on. Here's St. John Chrysostom talking about what passion really implies. And it comes from a Greek word, you'll see there, pathi. And he says that on the soul alone comes all the injury when one is angry or when one is envious, or whatever else of this kind one does, or rather suffers. For in fact, it is not an action. Anger is not positive activity, he says, but passion, not a doing, but a suffering. To be angered, to feel envy, and therefore they indeed are called passions. And if you continue on, of the soul, even wounds and bruises, for it is indeed a suffering, and worse than suffering. So I put this up not to confuse you, but to say, if you think of anger as a passion, everybody has that situation in their mind, and some of us are more prone to anger than others. But you have that situation in mind where something happens with your loved one, your mother, your spouse, your kids, your whatever, right? Somebody you love, somebody who you will forever love, right? And you snap. You're tired, you didn't sleep well, they did something that you had talked about many times before, whatever, right? And you lose it. You shout, or you walk out, or you whatever, like you just lose control. This is particularly poignant with young adults and their mothers, I find. So I always use that as an analogy, but whatever analogy works for you, what happens after? Usually, sometimes that day, sometimes the next day, sometimes the next week, you go back to the person and say, sorry, Mom, I didn't mean to do that. That wasn't really me. I lost control. I wasn't really in the right space or something. We excuse ourselves on some front. And that all may be true. I was tired, I was overworked, I was stressed out about something, I was worried, whatever. Maybe that's true. But notice the language we use. I don't know what got into me, or that wasn't really me, or whatever. That implies something like something came in and seemed to take control for a second, or I relinquished some level of control. And this thought drove me to do things that I wouldn't normally do. And that's how the church fathers think about passion. That if we allow these impulses and thoughts that present themselves to us, and sometimes they're angelic thoughts, they say, thoughts from God, and the angels, of course, are messengers of God, and they're good thoughts, and sometimes we dismiss them, sometimes we listen to them. And then sometimes there are demonic thoughts that say, you're going to let him talk to you like that? How are you going to let this happen again? And then suddenly we snap. And that's the image of the passions, right? Something that comes in and feeds you a thought and does it enough times, or you allow it to play in your mind enough times that suddenly that thing takes you and you're down a road where you're like, I didn't mean to do this. And not again. I wouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have, so on and so forth. We get regret and shame and so forth and all these other things. That's what the image of the passions implies for the church fathers. These things that we allow to take control of our reason. That we allow them to suddenly suspend our ability to act the way that we know we should act. Does that make sense? So that's how passion has been used in English up until like 30, 40 years ago. Now I'm so passionate means like I really, really love something. That's new. I think we use it that way to imply like it now has control over my activity. I'm so passionate about becoming, I don't know, a dentist. Now I'm going to do everything in my power to do so. But when I use the word passion, I mean this first kind that we're talking about, this rational control thing that's suspended for a few seconds or minutes or hours or, God forbid, months and years. I don't mean I'm so passionate about becoming a chemist. That's a totally different, that's English being funny, okay? So then, in the list that we get of the passions, the one that becomes the most common from the 4th century comes to us from Evagrius. Now, he listed what he calls 8 generic thoughts. The implication here is not like, this isn't the 7 deadly sins. This isn't, like the 7 deadly sins came from this list. They had this list in the West, and then a few changes were made. Actually, I suggest that at the bottom for you. But this isn't a list of like the really bad things you might do, or the deadly sins that are like worse than other sins. The reason Evagrius suggests this list, he says, I collected the wisdom of the desert. He died in 399. And he says, no matter how complicated a thought or a problem you're having, it breaks down into one of these 8, or a combo. And so it's a diagnostic tool. And it helps the individual who's trying to repent say, well, what's at the root of the reason that I'm afraid of this thing? Right? You'll see, like, fear isn't a passion here, but it very well could be that I'm afraid because I'm greedy, the 3rd passion, because if I lose my stuff, then I lose my place and I won't feel secure because I'm attached or addicted to money, and that's why I always act in fear towards new scenarios, and then I become angry at people who threaten me, or so on, right? His point is a diagnostic tool. In the West, sadness and Acedia, the 4th and the 6th one, become joined to become sloth. So anybody who went to a Catholic school will recognize this list a little bit. And then pride and vainglory are joined, and then you add envy, and that's how you get 7 instead of 8. That doesn't matter. We don't have to talk about that today. My interest in talking with you guys today is about the 6th one, the one that's least recognizable in English, and that's okay. And I won't get into it too much with you, but this is actually in order. Evagrius has a list in order on purpose. He says these follow from one another, and some are related in certain ways. But this one, despondency, is one, by the way, I'll use acedia or despondency, and I don't mean to confuse you. I just like, when I get talking, I don't think about which word I'm using. So if you get confused, just stop me. Evagrius gives a lot of rich descriptions to this acedia, which he identifies with the noonday demon of the 90th Psalm. And in some translations have it, the demon that lays waste at noonday, right? And so... and I'm going to read you some descriptions because I like defining things, but I think reading descriptions makes it feel very palpable. So first I do pictures. This is one face of acedia. For those who have kids, this is another. Or those who still like watching kids' TV. And this is my favorite picture. That I Googled like sloth, boredom. I Googled a bunch of words that might be related to it in English. And this was my favorite one. Because you have, these people who are all in the same room together, but they're not together at all. They're all in the same space, but nobody has any idea what's going on with the other. And you have technology distracting people, the torpor of sleep. This person is in this person's lap, but they have nothing to do with each other. And then, unfortunately, you have the demonic baby thing over there who's also on a phone, which is unfortunately far more real today than even when I found this picture a few years ago. But the notion of being all in the same place and not connected in any way is very much organically part of what this demon looks like. So this is a description from St. John Cassian, who's the one who recorded conversations with the Desert Fathers. He had visited Evagrius and took up his list. He records conversations in the conferences with people like St. Moses Strong, a number of other Desert Fathers like Abba Sisos, who you've only ever heard of in like a random saying, and we don't ever remember his name. So conferences is a really cool text. And in the first part of that, in Institutes, he says about this passion, that it produces a dislike of the place. Now I put in the red part, that's me. Dislike of the place. You just don't like where you are. There's no real reason for it. You know this feeling? You're like, I don't belong. It's not working. Apparently that happened in the 4th century. We're still discussed with the cell, right? There's a place where you go back to, which is your home base. And I think of that as your family home and also your church home, right? That place where you're meant to be saved. The monks were supposed to go back to the cell to encounter God there. And you and I, living in the world, we go back to our family home to really learn to love, and we work together in these communities in church to learn to serve one another. And so you can think of that as the cell today. And my favorite, this last part of this, and then it continues, disdain and contempt of the brethren who dwell with him. This is the like everybody at church is annoying feeling. This is the like if only my parents weren't so whatever feeling. Apparently the monks could experience that too. And then I think this first sentence is very, like I feel this one. It makes the man lazy and sluggish about all manner of work which has to be done. Okay, check. It prevents him from staying in his cell or to care about reading, and he groans because he can do no good while he stays there. Yeah, check. And complains and sighs because he can bear no spiritual fruit so long as he is joined to that society. So there are monks who would go to their Abba and say, you know, Abba, like the problem is the brethren. It's not me, you know. I'm doing well, I'm doing my rule, whatever, but the problem is the group. Like if they weren't so bad, I could actually be saved. God could work in me. You know, actually, and some of the monks would do this. We have a couple recorded conversations where they go to their Abba and say, you know, Abba, they want me to be the abbot in the next monastery over. And I was thinking maybe God is calling me to it. And sorry to say it, but essentially the Abba says something along the lines of, forgive my language, like, shut up and go back to your cell. You know, the conversation always goes like that. Like, okay, that's not, go back to where you're supposed to be. Because it's always like, what if I did this thing and it could be better and I could be better and if I just, you know what, like maybe Abuna gave me the wrong service. You know, maybe Abuna doesn't understand my skills. Better yet, right? Maybe it's like, maybe God just gave me like a really bad family, you know? We're not a good mix. Maybe I should just leave. This students experience this very poignantly, right? I don't know why I picked this major. This is crazy. This is insane. I don't know what I'm doing. My life is all in chaos and meaningless. I'm just going to drop out. And it's like, it's okay. It's just a stats exam, you know? So we all have these moments that he describes in our own ways, but the monks have it in a very clear way because they only have a few contexts in which they live, right? Which is why we can read them. This is the end of that quote. He says, and I love the last part. He says, he imagines no cure for so terrible an attack can be found in anything except visiting some one of the brethren or in the solace of sleep alone. Then the disease, this passion, suggests that he ought to show courteous and friendly hospitalities to the brethren and pay visits to the sick, whether near at hand or afar off. So service in the desert was often a ploy of the demons to get you away from what you were supposed to be doing. Now, that doesn't mean that every time we get the thought, I should ask about that youth, that it's demonic, right? Obviously, God can instill these thoughts in us. But if you'll notice, and I speak for myself here, the thought, oh man, that kid hasn't been to Sunday school in a long time, usually happens when I'm supposed to be doing something else, right? The one time in my life I decide I'm actually going to stand to pray at a reasonable time so that I don't fall asleep in the middle of my prayer, and suddenly all of the youth pop into my mind, like I'm some savior of the whole world, and I really should have asked about them, you know, and I'm so terrible at this, and it's like, now like 45 minutes have passed, and that dream I had of actually being alert during my prayer is gone, you know. So it's not to say the asking about the sick was wrong. Of course, the Lord himself says that in that you have done it to the least of my brethren, you've done it to me. But the monks noticed very acutely that these thoughts would happen to them, especially when they were supposed to be doing other things, right? Weren't you going to be reading, you know, during that time because you're supposed to increase your spiritual reading? Didn't the Buddha give you a discipline to be doing at this time of night or this time of morning? Why suddenly have you thought it a good idea to start going to the gym then, you know? Or to call your friend to ask about them right now. Evagrius gives a discipline along this line. He says, look, if you have a really good thought, if you have a beautiful and blessed and holy thought, just leave it alone. Leave it alone for 2 or 3 days, and if it's gone, it was from the demons, and if it's from God and He wants it done, guess who's going to remind you? And I take that as a good way to think about these things. But Evagrius will define this for us and sort of give here's a 10-word definition. He says that this passion, acedia or despondency, is a simultaneous long-lasting movement of anger and desire. Both things are at play. The former is angry with what is at hand, you hate what you have, and the latter yearns for what is not present. You wish you could have what you don't have. One way of thinking of this is in the middle of any fast, most of us, especially young people, sorry to say, will go and open the fridge, which is stocked full of Siyami food, and say there is nothing to eat. You know, that's hatred of what you have and yearning for what you do not have. Fool again, you know, like ta'amaya tani. And your mother just made it fresh too, you know, and it's like, what do you mean tani? We didn't have any for a week. But like khalas wurimt, you know. This passion that suggests to us what you have is horrible, and what you don't have, that's what you really need, I think is built into the society. I think when new phones can come out every like 6 to 12 months, and they have no difference except for like the number of circles back here or something, you know, like, oh, it takes better pictures. I'm not that old. Pictures when I was a kid always had your dad with a red eye, and they were fuzzy, and the light was always off. Like, that's the best we had when I was a kid, you know? And now it's like the picture's high definition, adjusts itself, changes shutter speed, and they're like, oh, la bas begad, we have a new one. Even better pictures. So I can look at the 18,000 pictures I have of my kids, and they can know day to day whether they had like a mole at age 4 or 4.5 or whatever. You know, and the whole society is built like this. You think about everything around you is built to be destroyed, right? It used to be the case that when your parents were young, you sold something, you know, say a refrigerator, on the basis this will last forever. It's a quality product, it's beautiful, it's not going to break down. Now they sell you something going, this fridge is going to make you feel good because it's sleek and it's beautiful and it's going to last 10 years, then you have to buy another one and make us feel richer. And so I think this movement, this like incessant sort of, call it restlessness, is something that is endemic to how we are as Westerners. It's always a race to something. It's always a constant movement. And when things don't feel fresh and exciting, say like service, which often sucks, right? Then suddenly we're like, maybe it's wrong. Maybe God didn't even want it. And when you say that, when you get to, maybe God didn't even intend this for me, now it's pious. Now the reason that you exit service, or you mentally check out of service, or whatever, now it's like it's God sanctioned. You know what, the Lord didn't will this for me. You know, or maybe it's just this group, or it's just the kids, or just my co-servants, or it's just my coordinator, or whatever. And there's this constant like restlessness. We need things to be fresh. We feel like we constantly want things to be new, to grab our attention. Right? I'm going to talk about this at the end if there's any time, but like this is why as Orthodox people we have a liturgy that doesn't change. To be like, no, this actually isn't about being fresh and new and exciting. This is about real union. Think to any of your relationships with your family, with your spouse, with a loved one. If you said, you know, it's not that exciting anymore. I've known you for 3 or 4 years. I'm going to check out and find a new one, right? We would consider that horrible. But when we do it with things like work or service or school or whatever we feel we're called to, we suddenly are like, yeah, you know what, maybe I'm just identifying a need I have. And the church fathers are like, maybe you're just battling a warfare. I'm going to give you a couple other faces, but this one, this is the long description that Evagrius gives that I think, I read this many years ago and I was like, cool, I see every element of that still in our society today, but this is his like longest bit of description. And he kind of describes what a monk might feel who's battling this demon. It says, the demon of Acedia, also called the noonday demon, is the most oppressive of all the demons. He attacks the monk from the 4th hour, that's about 10 a.m., and besieges his soul until the 8th hour, it's about 2 p.m. First of all, here's one that still sounds relevant. He makes it appear that the sun moves slowly or not at all, and that the day seems to be 50 hours long, right? So we don't watch the sun to tell time anymore. But you do watch your phone, right? Or if you have a watch still, if you're one of those kind, you'd be like, I know this especially from when I'm trying to get work done or when I was a student. And you'd sit there and you'd be like, oh man, I've been killing it. Oh, ouch. As a student, you may sit there and think to yourself, I have been working for like hours, and the mental exhaustion and energy I've put into this, and you look at your phone or your laptop or something, and it's been like 8 minutes, 12 minutes, 25 minutes, and you're thinking you've been there for hours, that the sun's going to have set when you leave. And this creates hardship too in things like service, right? Like, how long are we going to keep doing this, and the kids are not going to get it, and the kids are not going to attend, and they're just not going to pay attention anyway, and it's hopeless because like maybe it's just a Coptic problem. Like that's why our kids jump off the walls or something, or our kids don't listen to our Sunday school lessons and repeat them verbatim after. Try as I might, mine will never say my lessons verbatim after. So he continues and he says he compels the monk to look towards the windows, to jump out of his cell, to watch the sun, to see how far it is from the 9th hour, which is 3 p.m. The 9th hour, because that's when they used to eat. Their first meal would happen then. So this is like, if you experience this at work, this is when you're like, when's lunchtime coming? Like, it's time for a break, isn't it? And I know this feeling very strongly. And further he instilled, the 9th hour, to look this way and that way, lest one of the brethren come knocking, for distraction. And he instills in him a hatred for the place and for his life itself. For manual labor, which is the work that he's supposed to be doing, and also the idea that love has disappeared from among the brethren. I love this line, right? And that there is no one to console him. Should there be someone during those days who has offended the monk, this too the demon uses to add further to his dislike of the place. So you can imagine, these are monks who are stuck together for life, right? And now we're talking about us in the modern world. People move and they go around and they serve in this place because they got a job opportunity in a different province or whatever. And we have much more sort of fluctuant lives now. They're all over the place, whether by circumstances we can control or not. And you have that and you throw in this, and it's like, this is the demon that goes, hey man, the people in the service with you, I don't know if they're as invested as you. That guy said this to a youth the other day. Are you going to serve with those people? Can you tolerate somebody like that? And there's all these like pious things, right? Love has disappeared from among the brethren. I should go for a place where there is love. I should serve somewhere where the spirit is right. Where God is clearly at work, and all these lofty and pious thoughts that we may be driven to. And what the desert says in return is go back here, and once you fix that, we'll see what the service looks like. Once you fix here, we'll see what your job looks like now, or your relationship with your spouse, or whatever despondent thing we're suffering at the time. But this can drive us to think that everything other than us is the problem. This often does drive us to think that. He leads him to desire other places where he could easily find the wherewithal or the means to meet his needs, and pursue a trade which is easier and more productive. My favorite line in the whole description. He adds that pleasing the Lord is not a question of being in a particular place. Scripture says that the divinity can be worshipped everywhere. I call that Sunday morning demon, because suddenly the exhaustion you feel on a Sunday morning is nothing like the stuff you feel during the week, right? You're debilitated. Sunday morning comes around and you're like, I just can't move. My whole body is frozen, suddenly I realized that I'm really tired and I haven't maybe slept in a week. It was okay the whole week, mind you, just Sunday morning it didn't work. But this can be expanded, right? This can be like, pleasing the Lord is not a question of being insert in a particular service, Masan. You know what, maybe I could do God's work somewhere else. Okay, but Abuna put you in this place. Yeah, but maybe it's not where I belong. And the modern world is all about this, right? Just feel out how you're supposed to be. Your body's giving you a signal. All this kind of stuff that we tell ourselves in the modern West. Your emotions are telling you the reality, and it's like the desert is saying the complete opposite. No, they're not. They're lying to you right now. Hey, you don't belong here. Abuna says you do, and he's your spiritual father, isn't he? He is. So then you belong there. Even if he was wrong objectively in the decision, the obedience that you and I have in the scenario where I follow what I'm given is itself blessed, right? Even if you could somehow figure out, from the divine perspective, oh, Abuna made like not the optimal decision. Even then, God blesses the obedience that you and I have in the service that He puts us in, right? And we tie ourselves into knots in things like service, going like, how do I know? And what if I don't belong? And what if it just doesn't make sense for me? And I could have been doing something more meaningful. And it's like the thing I'm supposed to be doing is the thing I'm doing now. That's what Acedia and its cure tells us. Where am I supposed to be? Exactly where I am today. How do I know that? Because you're here. It's like this with marriage. Some of my other quotes come up and relate this to marriage, right? Yeah, you have some people with a notion of like, how do I know I married the one? Or young people are looking for the one. And when young people ask me, like, how do I know? I'll be like, the one you marry is the one. And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, when you are married, that's the one. Because that's how God intended it. Because Adam didn't go around picking from all the animals and then found Eve and was like, I like this one best. Right? God presents him to her after having shown him the animals, and he recognizes, right? And then he's like, okay, this is the one. And we get ourselves into knots in all sorts of things in our life, trying to figure out and have all the answers. And it's like sometimes the best thing to do is to be like, I'm here, I have to do what I'm supposed to be doing here. And then I don't have the burden of figuring out whether I'm in the right service or the right place or the right whatever. Like, I'm going to do what I'm doing here, and so be it. This is my layman, like if you don't have 45 minutes to tell people what is Acedia, this is Peter's definition. So if you want to ignore this slide, feel free. But when people ask me what does Acedia look like, I say, that like that feeling when you're kind of hanging out, you're bored, you can't bring yourself to do anything, but you hate that you're not doing anything. You just want to like leave your room or text somebody to hang out, or you're in the middle of a really long servants meeting talk and you're messaging somebody about what to eat after. You know that feeling? Some of you know it really well right now, right? This is the agitated boredom of what I would call Acedia. And that's like that being unsettled. It's not working. Why? And I just have to change. And when we're there, right, the temptation is to run and to listen to that. But unfortunately, apparently, that's totally the wrong advice and only leads us to destruction. I always have to check the time because I could talk for a long time about this, but I shouldn't. Do you guys normally end at 2? Or do you normally end like at 4? We could go on. I'll just keep talking until somebody like pulls me away, okay? Is that somebody give a signal like this, haga. Somebody turn off the mic somewhere, right? Then I'll know. I just like reading these with people because they feel so relevant even today. So this is another form of despondency. When he reads, the one afflicted with Acedia yawns a lot. This is particularly true with spiritual reading, okay? I have to read for my lesson. He yawns a lot and readily drifts off into sleep. He rubs his eyes and he stretches his arms. He turns his eyes away from the book and he stares at the wall. And he goes back to reading for a while, leafing through the pages. He flicks through. He looks curiously for the end of the text. When's this chapter going to end? He counts the folios. How many sections are there in this book? And he calculates the number of gatherings. When will this book end? Later, he closes the book and puts it under his head and falls asleep. But not a very deep sleep, for hunger rouses his soul and has him show concern for its needs. I really should get a snack. I'm not going to elaborate about that. Anybody who's ever studied anything in any way has experienced this. I still experience this every day. But something like this, that can be a face of Acedia. Again, not because the book is necessarily, say, like my ticket to salvation, but it's because it's where I should be. Okay, I'm sitting down, I'm doing this thing that I'm supposed to be doing. Or I've determined I'll do it. And Acedia says, anything you've determined to do, don't bother. Don't pay too much attention to it. Because instability of mind is what the demons want, right? The less stable my mind can be on things like prayer or reading or service or school or anything, the less stable it is when it comes to standing before God. The fathers remind us, we don't have separate lives. We don't live spiritual lives and then work lives and then school lives and then home lives. We're just one person. And if I train my mind to be constantly in a fluttering between things, say I go on, I don't know, Facebook or Instagram during my lectures in school, and then when I'm at my co-op, I'm texting the whole time, and then when I'm with my children at home, I have my phone out checking my email and so on. I can't dream of standing before God and having focus for longer than 3 seconds when it comes to prayer, because my mind has been taught to be unstable. I have taught myself that instability of place is normal. Maybe even I think it's a good thing, because I'm, I don't know, accomplishing everything. I'm replying to emails and hanging out with my kids. And in truth, of course, we know the reality is we're accomplishing nothing. We don't do a good job with this, and we don't attend to that. And that's where this despondency in prayer comes in. I like this one for, again, how physical it feels. At the time of the synaxis, when the monks would get together and pray, say Vespers prayer or something that they would do together, when the spirit of despondency attacks you, he suggests to you that psalmody is wearisome. This is boring, is the plain English of that. And with the greatest zeal, he hurls reluctance as an opponent to zeal, so that the soul, in a great hurry, hands the flesh over to the memory that it is exhausted for some reason or other. You ever went to go pray and had the worst headache of your life? You know, haven't had a headache all day, but suddenly that like piercing, sharp sensation, you know, you're like, oh, am I losing vision in this eye, or is it just hurting? You go Masad to read, and you know you have to read because Abuna told you to in your spiritual direction, or because you need to do it for service, or because you need refreshment of your soul, whatever. But you're like, okay, I'm going to read. Suddenly you're yawning. You know, you could have been talking to somebody 5 minutes prior and you're focused, and now suddenly, what am I going to do? I can't get through a page. When we keep vigil at night, let us not surrender the synaxis to despondency, lest the demons who stand around, right, who are watching this happen, collect the weeds of our thoughts and put them at once into the heart. For when we destroy the collection of hymns, we gather together the collection of thoughts. If we don't focus on this, then we become subject to the thoughts of despondency and distraction. About good work, right, we're told that the spirit of Acedia drives the monk out of his cell, but the monk who possesses perseverance will cultivate stillness. A person afflicted with Acedia purposes visiting the sick, but he's fulfilling his own purpose. I really should be doing something else, but I might as well go ask about this kid, or do this service, or find out if somebody at church needs something done. And none of that is bad, right? Again, like, service is beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to give your time to. But is it happening only when there are things that we actually should be doing? Or is it happening when we're genuinely free? Hey, I don't have anything this half morning. Maybe 4 or 5 days in advance, I'll text Abuna and say, is there anything that needs to be done at church I can take care of? But we often find ourselves last minute, the night before, the morning of, we're not doing anything, and we're like, maybe I'll just get out of my house. You know, maybe I'll just get distracted. And the same thing he says further, a monk given to Acedia is quick to undertake a service, but he considers his own satisfaction to be a precept. There's a haunting quote for me from, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the book, The Way of the Ascetics. And some of you know this? So, The Way of the Ascetics. So it's written by a layman, but he's describing how lay people in the world can live the ascetical life of the desert. And he says, the example he uses in the very first chapter still haunts me. He says, say, for example, that you and I are going to do a service. We're on our way to go feed the homeless and the hungry and the downcast, and it's a big deal, and you've made sandwiches, and you got up early, and you get on the bus and you go. He wrote the book a little bit before. Now everybody would hop in their private car. But anyway, say you hop in a bus together. You're going 4 or 5 hours away or something. And he says, if the bus breaks down, are you dejected? Are you sad? Are you upset? And Tito Calander, the author of The Way of the Ascetics, he says, like, well, then understand that maybe you were serving yourself to begin with. Because if God wants those hungry fed, he can do it without you, right? It's your dignity and mine that he allows us to serve with him, right? That he uses our hands to accomplish his work, and we must offer them to him. But if he then goes, I'm going to do this over here, and maybe you and I don't even know how it's going to be done. And if I go, well, why not me? How come I don't get this service? how come I don't whatever, or no, I'm just upset. I'm really actually upset that they weren't fed. This has ruined my day, but I'm upset for a holy reason. And it's this, like, considers his own satisfaction to be a precept. Like, who were you serving in this case? Was it you? Was it impressing somebody else? Was it actually God? Right? Who was the goal of this? Like, you've all been to a service or done a service where you show up and it sucks. Nobody's there, or it's not taken up very well, or it doesn't attract that much attention, and you put in a lot of effort. It's like, okay, we planned for 110 came, or something like that, right? And the question that the monks were told to ask themselves is like, so who is this for? Say a monk in the desert goes to visit a sick man, finds out he's better, and he's actually left the cell. Is he upset I wasted my time? Or was he doing God's work and he goes, oh, okay, the Lord healed him, so be it. Now I go back to my cell. And so on and so forth. I'm going to skip some slides because I purposely overpack talks, mostly because I get too excited, but I recognize that it's been an hour. I'm going to skip a couple of things just to maybe, no, this was a good quote, but I won't read it to you. It was all good, but anyways. I'm gonna do this slide and then do like the conclusion slides with you, okay? This one I think is really daunting for what it means for how we even perceive our everyday life, like the moment-to-moment things that we do. So this actually is by a Catholic. This quote by a Catholic author who's the abbot of a monastery, and he's kind of trying to reclaim acedia because it says the West, and using the word sloth, has lost some of the meaning of it. And he writes some really rich descriptions, and he says, think about time. Usually when confronting the suspension of time, you've got nothing to do. And the void of boredom, the most classic strategy is to try to, quote, kill time, as we say. I just have 5 minutes to kill, 10 minutes to kill, whatever. No doubt it is not insignificant that this idiomatic expression uses the verb to kill, which relates boredom to hatred. Time is not killed. On the contrary, it is necessary to wed it, in other words, to cling to the present moment and to live it in all its spiritual intensity. Now, believe you me, if I could live like this, if I could be married to the present moment, every moment of my life, I would be a completely different person. My wife would be so much happier with me, Like the whole world would be a completely different place if I said, no, I'm not killing 10 minutes. We don't have 30 minutes to just spend idle here as we're like figuring out what's next. We're actually being very present in the present moment. The world would be a completely different place, right? Service would be different, home would be, everything would be different. The word boredom, just in case you're interested, there are books about it. The word boredom in English actually doesn't exist until the mid-1800s. As a phrase, people don't describe being bored until the 18th or ish century, and then in the 19th century it explodes. And that has something to do with the meaning that we attach to life. Now people hear that and they're like, come on, Peter, people were always bored before. Somebody had to have been bored somewhere before 1800. I can tell you, my spiritual father tells me, and I believe what he tells me, even though I don't know what it would be like. I asked him about this one day, and he goes, I honestly can't tell you, Peter, that I have ever been bored in my life. There's always something fascinating. My spiritual father also is the type to like find a beetle on the ground and start like looking at it and going, do you see the red? Do you see how beautiful it is? And I'm like, it's disgusting. It's about to eat your hand, it looks like, My wife is like him, and so like I'm lucky. I'm the only screwed up person in that context. But when you know those people that can be fascinated with everything around them, they sit there and they're like, you imagine making this bench? How much effort it took to carve this out here, this beautiful, My spiritual father and my wife are both people like this. I'm not. I look at it, I'm like, yeah, it's a nice bench. Yeah, well, I wonder if they'll buy more, and that's it. But apparently, this is one of the consequences of this way of thinking, of this way of seeing. Because if I can't gift myself, if I can't offer myself to the present moment, then I can't do it to my neighbor, to my service, to my family, so on and so forth. And this is the danger, I think, of why acedia is so harmful, is that it doesn't really have a name in the modern world. You can call it boredom, but it's not exactly that. You can call it agitation, it's not exactly that. Acedia will later, in its other manifestations, suddenly force us to be restless and doing things non-stop. You know, you go from being the student who can't bring themselves to study and you're just frozen in time and not doing anything, and suddenly you've reorganized your closet. Like, why? Why now? You know, chemistry midterm tomorrow, all my notes are color-coded. But I didn't read any of them, I just color-coded them. Why? I don't know, actually. Like, hopefully I can study better. Great, it's like 3 a.m. before your exam. When are you going to study now? And the thing is, acedia can do this. It can make us go between like restless agitation and constantly doing things and feeling like, okay, got to have the schedule full, got to be doing something, got to be rendering some kind of service, to like dejection. And it's pointless. It doesn't really like, I mean, I don't know, who cares? And these are the two poles that it can take us down. I'm going to go to the end so that people don't become despondent because of me. I recognize that could be a thing. Here, I'm going to read you like this passage just out of interest, because Evagrius also describes a method called talking back, where he says when a demonic thought comes, as the Lord does, we can confront it with a biblical text. He suggests this isn't for everybody, and that it may be a certain stage of spiritual life where this is required, and that it may be certain thoughts where it's required. So like lust, for example, the Desert Fathers say run. Get out of the way, don't talk to it, you know. But acedia is one where there's a lot of cognitive stuff. There's a lot of like, hey, what about this and your service and whatever. Read the second one. So the third bullet. He says that there's a tempting thought from acedia that says, for the tempting thought that is moved by demonic acedia to slander the Abba, claiming he does not console the brothers, that he is harsh in his relations with them, and that he has no sympathy with them and their distress. That could apply to service a lot, right? You could say that about your coordinator. God forbid, you guys really have no reason to say this, but you could in your madness say this about your priests. Abunas doesn't understand. And okay, maybe nobody gets me, and so on. And the word he says here is from Exodus, you shall not revile God nor speak ill of the ruler of your people. And there are all these kind of thoughts that can be presented to us. I'm going to give you my summary quote. Which one shall we do? There's a lot of summary slides. Okay, I'm going to read two things with you and then let you leave, and we can talk about more later. So look at the second quote. Evagrius says, well, what's the cure then? What do you do? Is it all just that we're doomed because we live in this world? So the second passage, he says, perseverance is the cure for acedia. Now that sounds like, okay, great. Keep doing what I'm doing. I want you to think perseverance in Greek actually implies standing under the yoke. That's what the word literally renders. So perseverance in English sounds passive. You're like, okay, I'll just sit by, well, all sucks, and I'll do nothing, you know. Whereas to persevere in this context means, no, if you see a cross, right, if you see something that looks hard, or it sucks, or it's not enjoyable, pick it up. Pick it up, carry it, and render the service that you were supposed to, right? Follow Christ, who obviously, as we see in the Garden of Gethsemane, is not like thrilled about the cross. This isn't some sort of weird like, yeah, this is going to be really awesome, you know, and he's going to get a kick out of it, like we expect to sometimes from our service or from hard relationships or whatever. But he sees the cross and he says, I'll carry it, right? This is what is good to be done. And so for us, that's what this perseverance means. To see a cross standing in front of us, to identify it, this thing about the service is really hard. So now what? I will work towards that thing in the service, and I will do whatever I can. I will spill whatever blood has to be spilled in order to make that part of the service better in whatever way God gives me, right? Because it may be the case that it won't get better. But it's not the case that God hasn't given to you anything to do in that context. Even just showing up is, well, usually that's the big thing to do. You guys know what I'm talking about. So he continues, he says, perseverance is the cure for acedia, along with the execution of all tasks with great attention and the fear of God. All tasks. Work, school, home, everything. Set a measure for yourself in every work and do not let up until you have completed it. Pray with understanding and intensity, and the spirit of Acedia will flee from you. I love this last part. This is practical. Set a measure for yourself in every work that you have. I am going to spend 1 hour doing this task. Oh, it's not done? That's fine, you did your thing. Now, maybe you next time will budget more time or something. But if it's like minute 12 and you're like, this isn't really that exciting, that's okay. Well, you said you were going to do it for an hour. That's what you budgeted. So do it. I am going to prepare my Sunday school lesson by Thursday, right? Or whatever, right? It's Wednesday night. I said I was going to have it done tomorrow, but I really feel like I should sleep. Well, you set a measure, Okay, I will stay up all night if I have to finish this task. And then probably revise it after, because if I was up all night, it's probably not that good. But anyway, because I said I'll do it, I'm going to stick to that measure. And that gives that discipline of mind that allows us to focus on these things. And there are more pieces of advice, but I'm going to give you Peter's summary. Now this is Peter summarizing, so again, you don't have to stick to this, but this is me summarizing some of what had been said before, because I know I'm normally going to run out of time, so I make account for it. So learning to be present. What's the thing I have to do now? Be present. Okay, I'm at this service, it's really boring, Even I find the lesson for the kids boring. Stay off your phone, Take from it every single, squeeze every bit of juice you can from this lemon. This person's talking about something and I have no idea what they're talking about. Pay as much attention as you can, right? I really don't want to show up for another, youth Halloween event. They're always the same thing. Show up anyway, whatever. Take from it what you can. Stick to routine. The fathers tell us offering thanks can be a cure for acedia because you can't hate something you're thankful for, right? You might fake it at first. You might say, thank God, glory to God for all things, as Chrysostom says when he's in exile. But you might fake it in the beginning, but eventually doing so is going to work away at the hardness of our heart, right? Making time for stillness. Maybe I need technology-free time in my life so that I'm not constantly flipping between things. Start something and finish it. Let's leave that. Second guessing our motives. This is a good one in this context specifically, not because you guys are bad servants, not because I'm always conniving when I'm trying to do something, but because if I'm given a clear line from my father, do this, that's easy, right? Obedience is one of the easiest things in the world because it's like, do this. Okay. What if it's not my responsibility to figure out if it is wrong? Because I actually was just given the task, right? And it's easy in the sense that now you don't have to think about the contingencies and you don't have to say, well, it wasn't going as well. Well, the service, it kharabit. What if I didn't do that? You did what you were supposed to. That's the easiest thing in the world. And then if there are other things where you and I have the discretion, just a simple question, is it the right time? Or did I just get this thought for another reason? My spiritual father, he also says something haunting. He was asked one time, I was listening to this talk of his, he was asked one time, Abuna, how do we get rid of those thoughts that present themselves to us? Do this, see that, oh, look at that. I don't know how to dismiss that right when it comes into my mind. It seems so difficult. And he looks at the person, he goes, you remember that thought you had probably sometime last week, maybe even today, that said to you that you should pray? You know how you dismissed it? The same way you dismissed that thought, dismiss the demonic thought. And he said that and it really hurt. I still feel the pain of his comment because I'm I do that every day. But just having the notion that just because I want something, just because it's in my mind now doesn't mean it's right. It may be. Maybe God put it in your mind for a good reason. But having that second of okay, slow down, is this right or not? If all of this was totally lost and we didn't have any of the church and fathers and all this stuff to go back to with context, the last part I think is enough. Liturgy is a total cure for acedia in the sense that the church built into her spirituality says, look, show up to the same place each week. Okay, there's routine. When you show up at the right time. There's more routine. And when you show up, we're going to use the same words every time. It's not going to be fresh, and there's no lights and music, and nothing's going to be blaring, and nobody's going to be swinging from the top or anything. You know, there's going to be no entertainment, because it's not about you. Okay. And what am I supposed to do? Offer thanks. That's literally the whole point. It's called Eucharist. That's the word thanksgiving, right? And now what? Well, you're coming to meet Christ. And you're going to do it, guess what? With real wooden benches, you know, real material. You're going to be really connected to the earth. You're going to stand, and we're going to use real bread and real wine to become the body and the blood of Christ. And we're going to really be in contact with each other, which is why, like, COVID liturgy was a thing, but real liturgy is a real thing. And we're going to meet the same people. The same people who we find it hard to love, we're going to come back to and meet each week, right? That's the beauty of having a church family. You'll notice in your own personal lives, the hardest people to love are the people who are nearest to you, right? The people that get on your nerves the most are the people nearest to you. And everybody should have in their life a person, people, whatever, at church, who you find it hard to love, because we are all different. But that's the point of love. And you show up and you be like, instead of changing contexts or changing churches, because every time somebody gets married, they all look at me and say, Abdelmalak, again for the 3,000th time, I want to go somewhere where nobody knows me, right? And you have this temptation. Or like you grow up in a church where you're like, Uncle Fulan always says this thing and he drives me nuts. Cool. Uncle Fulan's part of your salvation, right? He's part of your ability to stand under the yoke. And so on and so forth. And I think it's a beautiful thing about your community here, right? You guys are very much together. As far as I know, Brampton people don't church hop, as far as I know. Okay, I'm not accusing anybody by saying that. There isn't a notion of like, go here, catch early liturgy next week, go to late liturgy the week after, you know, go midweek the week after that. And there's something beautiful in that. Because you learn to love as family. You learn to be together as family and to serve together. And there will be things that suck because it's hard to always be with the same people. That family is hard. But that's the most rewarding relationships we have for the same reason that it's hard. Think when you were students, the people you stayed up with all night long studying next to, you were the closest to them. And you went through the worst circumstance of your life. You know, for the engineers in the room, it probably had something to do with circuits. You know, or mechanics or something. And you're like, nobody even cares, it's invisible, you know? But you're close to them just because you went through something hard. And these things weld us together, and they teach us how to be present together. And so I think if you took nothing away from the topic of Acedia and a fancy word and Greek words and all this stuff, just being together, coming together, for service, for liturgy, for the things that involve us all, for service to the world, service to your own youth, whatever, these things are very much the cure to the same thing that is trying to get me to not do them, right? That is trying to get me to run away from them because they're hard. Showing up on time, being dedicated, having every word, you know, in my mind. St. John of the Ladder, John Climacus, and I'll conclude with this, he says at the very end of a bunch of stuff that he's gone through, and he goes, look. The goal of the Hesychast, the one who is still, is to have his mind and his body in the same place at all times. If my mind and my body can be in the same place at all times, I could be saved, he says. You know, because like I could stand in the liturgy and totally think about everything else I'm supposed to do, and the things I didn't do, and the things that demand my attention, and maybe they really do, but I can't be present like that. And if I do that in liturgy, I'm going to do it with my kids. And if I do that with my kids, I'm going to do it in my service, and so on and so forth. And then I'm never, ever present to anybody. But I'm always in my imagination. Right? I said I would conclude with that. I was going to actually keep talking, but I'm resisting the urge. So I know we're probably way past time. I don't know if you guys like do questions of discussion, if you hang out after, whatever. I'm happy to do anything. You have a question? Am I allowed to ask you about your question? Or will other people be angry at us? Okay, it doesn't matter. We'll let you ask anyway.
Okay, so since you said Acedia is like a kind of a demonic thought, is it another face of ADHD? Because a lot of things looks similar, and like that one is more of behavioral issues, and this is more like the spiritual part. But are they similar? Are they the same at certain point? Because a lot of things sounds the same.
So she asked the question to try to get me in trouble. So, like you guys are like my brothers and sisters. If I was to encounter somebody who said, I am really struggling with my focus, I'll put it this way. I have not met yet somebody who has ADHD or claims to or is treated for or whatever, who is not suffering from all of these things and would not benefit from all of this. I think practically the thing that I find fascinating is people will be like, my child has ADHD, and I'm like, how long are they on a phone? And they're like, they have their own phone. I'm like, he's 7. What do you mean they have their own phone? Yeah, man, like stay connected. Connected to what? You know, all he does is play Roblox or something. You know, and it's amazing to me that we as a society are willing to go the length of saying, look, there's a syndrome that people have, when there are engineers and CEOs that make millions, billions of dollars each year on capturing our attention, right? That the whole industry of social media, of marketing, of advertising, of all these things is built to take our attention. It is built to basically ensnare us. There is a book that became quite famous. I believe he wrote it in the 90s, and it's been released in a new edition, a secular book called Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. And it makes the point that society's basic economy now is not money, it's not buying things, it's not import, export, it's attention, right? That's all you and I really are today. We're a thing whose attention is to be ensnared, way more than any age before, you know? So I can't see a strong difference between the snare of a child's attention or an adult's attention and what Evagrius describes in the 4th century. I am sure that there are other techniques that people employ today to deal with it, and we could talk about overlap and similarities and that kind of thing. But when I read this, I'm like, okay, apparently the monks could be distracted by the movement of the sun, and now we have children who get distracted by TV. And then people you know, say, my kid can't focus for more than 2 minutes on a book. And I'm like, why would he? It has no flashing lights, there's no sounds, there's no people swinging from trees. Like, why would he focus on the ink on paper when everything else in his life is like this at him? Right? Now he's addicted to stimulus. Right? Now he's an addict to constantly being barraged, and he doesn't know the difference. Have any of you ever left your cell phone at home from work or school? Was your attention like dramatically different? Leave your cell phone away from not at your desk, not oh, I have it turned over, right? Leave your cell phone at home. Like, I tried this the other day and then my 2-factor thing wouldn't work. So I had to beg somebody for their phone, and it was a big deal. But when I have had the ability, when the Lord has allowed that I leave my stupid device at home, my attention's crazy, right? My ability to be present, and I'm like, wow, is this what it was like when I was a kid, when I didn't have a phone? Where like I don't even have the anticipatory, like, what if somebody got back to me? Oh, what if somebody messaged me? What if somebody needs my attention? You know, there are not that many things that need our attention that urgently all the time. My father-in-law, God repose his soul, when he saw somebody too addicted to their phone, he was an old school man, and he'd be like, so how's it going, Obama? And that was his way to say something like, even the president doesn't need to be contacted as urgently as you. And that's what I remember now. When I'm holding my phone too long, I'll say to myself, how's it going, Obama? Or Trump, I should say now, I guess. So I don't know. I think it's complicated, and we could talk about it for a long time. But I see all of what the modern world describes today and renamed in 1990s in what's called the DSM-4. I see all of that in this. And Evagrius is older. I trust him more. So, but anyway, that's all I'll say about it. I think that means we're good. People need to leave, right? Oh, is that a question? Oh, okay. This sounds important.
Okay, so thank you so much for today's lecture. It's amazing. So let's go back to the important things that, like we got under the pressure of doing everything online, everything is virtual, but now we are forcing ourselves to go back and like all these struggles. From this beautiful lecture today, I am happy to recognize the 8 thoughts that can attack us so we can identify them. And this is the first thing that we can do, like to identify that we have a bad thought. So the second step is not to deal a lot with this thinking and to expose it or reveal it to our Father of Confession so we can get guidance all the time. The third point is I love to thank all the servants here for being here because this is a challenge in itself. Most of us tend not to come to the servants meeting because it's after service, after a long day, but after exactly. So they're doing great. Thank you so much for being here too.
He said I'm gonna make up.
Thank you, Peter. As Tawana said, it's amazing lecture, and we all in need to listen to this. And thank you for the practical, your summary, the practical tools. Thank you so much. Nobody wants to ask? Let me ask you maybe.
Boredom, because you were saying how we shouldn't kill time. Okay. You're going to be on the recording. No, don't clip this. For boredom, if we're not supposed to kill time, but we should be present, but there's simply nothing to do, what do we do?
I think the question is kind of a funny one because I can't, when I'm sitting with myself thinking, was there really a time where there was nothing to do? Simply speaking, plainly, being with my kids, standing in contemplation, standing in prayer, working on a task that I was supposed to. I really, because of the fast pace of our lives today, I think we actually almost never have any time to do nothing. If you lived 200 years ago, I imagine where there could be a room to say something like, yeah, they're really I tended to the cattle and the fields are cut and there isn't anything to do. I can imagine that. But today, with the amount of stuff going on and we're constantly bombarded, I just don't know if that exists. And I think that if we really, let's say we really did have nothing to do. So, okay, I assume we don't, but let's say we did. What a beautiful opportunity to cultivate thought and relationship with God and silence and prayer in my own heart. I got a gift from someone, which was a fancy pen. And I always made fun of people who use fancy pens. It's it looks like the one that the monastics used to because it's the nib is with the ink and stuff. And all. I used to laugh at that. And then I wrote with it one day, and it writes very differently. And I had to kind of watch how I did my letters and stuff, and I was so much more attentive to what I was doing. So now when I don't have anything to do, I'll write down some thoughts I had during the day. And it's been fascinating. I'm I thought about all this today? How did this happen? I didn't know I had this many thoughts. So even something like that, where for some people, if it was my wife, she would paint something. And it would be her way of contemplating and entering into a deeper notion of reality, just to be present. Just to sort of say, I'm going to just depict this flower. And so I think there are ways around that. Even if we feel okay, there isn't anything I have to be doing, well, then it's what about being present to God? What about contemplating? What about thinking about I've never really thought about the word love or justice or mercy or compassion or something. What does that even mean? And that's where philosophy came from in the ancient world, right? People didn't have stuff to do permanently 24/7, they were they weren't constantly bombarded, and they'd be like, what is the nature of goodness? You know, what would a good being be like, and so on. And maybe for some people that leads to really weird avenues of thought, but like this was people's like normal life. One other thing that comes up in the cultural talk of Acedia, I'd read a book that looked at the advent of new forms of movement as being part of it. And I'd never thought about this. The author makes the point, he goes, look, if you had to take a horse and carriage everywhere you went, which means you had to be looking at the road, engaging with the context. If you hear something, you have to look out into the forest and see if there's actually like a wolf there or not. And the horse is going to get tired, you got to pay attention to the horse, and so on and so forth. You're completely engaged, right? When trains first started, and then later personal vehicles became more popular, now you're passive. Now you're just there. Right. In fact, actually, the novel, like the idea of reading a book just for kicks, like for entertainment, as opposed to for facts, arose right around the time of the formation of trains, because you have nothing to do. And I think just at that level, yeah, it's baked into our society to have all of these like monotonous things going on. But if I can find a way to fill it with meaning, even if I don't feel like there's something needful at the time, then maybe that's a way God can break into my everyday life. Is that fair? Back to you, Abu.
I was about to comment on this, so she made the question, so that would be great actually. I was about to ask, should we feel boredom or acedia in the presence of God? Do you think? Should we?
Should we? I do, but shouldn't.
If yes, so what happened with Martha and Mary? Whom do you think? There was Martha and Mary, and both in the presence of God. In eternal life, are we going to suffer this? Martha was working, and Mary was listening. So there is a difference between being present in being there in the presence of God and actually enjoying, which he said, contemplating or reflecting. Don't just stay still. In the presence of God, of course, we need to reflect, and you will be enjoying. Do you think Saint Mary, who kept everything inside, she suffered this? Of course not. She was watching. She never feels this. What do you think?
No, I have nothing to add.
This is just what I was thinking of while you're talking, but you made it perfectly. Thank you so much, Peter. Any questions? Any other questions?
If you fear being attacked by the crowd, we can just talk after.
Yeah, there is a cake after. And it's better to talk while eating. Abuna. Birthdays? We're celebrating birthdays.
يستحق بيتر كيك. ثانك يو حبيبي. اعمل ايه؟